Hi, my name is Geoff Brady. My YouTube channel is Budget Moon. I started filming UFOs in New York City since around 2005. When I moved there in 2001, I noticed there was a subtle feeling of being watched from above. It's odd and you can easily dismiss it, but sometimes during those moments, I'd witness a flash or a sparkle in the daytime sky, prompting me to look, and the object would often vanish or go behind a cloud. And I'm thinking, okay, these are UFOs. I'm actually seeing them.
I lived not too far from a vacant field in an area called Hunters Point South, along the East River. In this field, you're standing on layers of history, at least dating back to the Lenape tribes in the 15th century. It was once a site of the Jack Frost sugar refinery in the early 1900s, and it was also the location of a concrete plant and then the Daily News printing press. But around this time, circa 2005, the land was partially excavated for another development. There was construction debris, piles of gravel and dirt. There were boulders of asphalt and concrete, remnants of demolished industrial buildings pulled out of the ground, tangled with rebar. In the summer, the empty lot would be blanketed with wildflowers and attract many types of birds and insects. There was also a stand of trees growing along the river's steep coastline. Most of the time, I had this untamed landscape to myself. It was not to last. I knew there was a finite window of opportunity here because this was prime waterfront real estate. Today, the vacant field is virtually unrecognizable. It's since been the site of massive luxury residential towers and a structured park area.
That gives you the lay of the land. In the spring of 2005, I had a UFO sighting out there. One afternoon, I ventured out to that field. I was sweeping the horizon with binoculars and then happened to look straight up. I couldn't believe it. Right above me were two long triangles positioned horizontally side by side, motionless. They were a sandstone color, and surrounding them were deeply colorful round objects levitating in the air. Some were pink, violet, orange, and green. It's hard to describe how vibrantly colorful they were. Here's a rendering of it I made using paint in Windows 10. From that experience, I bought a Canon PowerShot G7 to catch more photographic evidence. The next notable event was about 2 years later, March 2007, same location. Within about 15 minutes of being there, I heard helicopters approaching. They were military helicopters coming in from the south, kind of low, above the East River. Instead of continuing on their course, they make a U-turn from right about where I was standing and head back due south. At some point, I stopped recording video and took photos. I thought, okay, did some agency detect UFO activity and call this dispatch in? The video resolution isn't great, but you can see white round UFOs flying by as they make this turn. The photos taken in those moments show a white disc-shaped object near the helicopters. Given this level of activity, I dedicated time to gather as much visual evidence as possible. For the next 10 years, a wide variety of daytime UFOs were showing up, and they're not your typical flying saucer. They're mainly anomalous airborne shape-shifting entities that seem to communicate using mimicry, archetype shape, and color.
This is a breakthrough sighting in August of 2012. Right above me in the abandoned field, this rotating object moved south to north at a perfect angle for the camera to record without moving the tripod too much. Notice how it's cycling through nearly identical permutations of size and shape. Could these objects be Etherians, a term referenced in the 19th century Oahspe Bible? The book is a retelling of cosmology and ancient history known to be the product of automatic writing by a dentist named John Ballow Newbrough. Etherians are of the etheric and said to be non-physical beings operating midway between planets. Another term is aeroforms. Fortean author Mead Lane, who wrote The Ether Ships and Its Solution, used this word to describe certain flying objects. Here's one of those rare video opportunities. I watched a glowing orange object fly into the clouds, and then I pressed record, anticipating it would emerge over the top edge of this cloud bank, capturing a secret world normally imperceptible to humans. Some of these aerial forms take on unique shapes, not unlike those within the depths of the ocean. Notice what appears as the bottom half of an anchor at one end, and on the other, a series of spiked protuberances. This object also has a similar rotation, and as the front of this anchor moves back around toward the camera, there's a sequential display of red flashes. If you look closely, on the outer sides appear to be the eyes of this entity. Here, a pearl-colored UFO moved at a slow, consistent pace, as if directed on a path. The clouds passing give the impression it's moving quickly, but it's not. There was plenty of time to zoom in with a steady hand. However, I noticed something else coming into view. Panning the camera just above this object, a luminous red-colored object moves in a bit closer. It's about to get dark out in the abandoned field, and this dimly lit object traverses the evening sky. An increase in its size and luminosity can be observed. It begins to slow down as a smaller object from above seems to almost slide against it, as if exchanging a plasma charge. Notice the tether or filament on this aerial form. It's perfectly straight, like a drinking straw. If you watch closely, you can see colors changing within the spiraling purple bands. Another larger sky serpent some distance away was also captured on this day. This type of colorful UFO is often filmed in Mexico, but here it is over millions of people in New York City.
One of the issues with attempting to catch UFOs on video in New York City is that you're likely on someone's radar. There was a steady surveillance through the years. Even drones would interfere. I've seen people spy on me out at the abandoned field from behind piles of dirt. Helicopters or small planes circling would try to disrupt the vibe right when UFOs start showing up, or at least that's what it seemed like. It's bizarre to even speculate how that level of interference can be accomplished. In one incident, I arrive at the abandoned field. An unmarked vehicle pulls up to me. I'm standing on large rocks piled up along the East River. Two men get out of the driver and passenger sides of the car at the same time. They're wearing sunglasses, guns holstered on their waist. I'm standing there with my backpack and tripod, and I ask, "Can I help you guys?" They look at each other and then look at me, and without a word, they get into the car, back up, and pull away. I wasn't really deterred by this intimidation, but I did think about what they might be concerned about. I'm in a UFO hotspot with a camera, yes, but could there be something else going on in this area? In May 2015, my paranormal odyssey in this field ended with undercover police singling me out amid the many dog walkers and explorers who had actually worn a path through this field. On that day, I caught on video the closest UFO at the time. It looked like a giant white bedsheet. After the sighting, I packed up and started walking out of the field. A falcon flew right by my face, and looking back, it might have been a warning because undercover officers were in position to arrest me for trespassing. 3 plainclothes officers with bulletproof vests stepped out of a tan SUV with a plumbing service sign on the door. One officer searched my backpack, another retraced my steps back behind the chain link fence and said she saw me drop something. She returns, puts on rubber gloves, and searches my pockets. I was nervous they might plant something on me. They talk to each other for a while, run my information, and decide to let me go. No arrest, nothing. I get home to review the footage of this close-up UFO. I press play, and right when I zoom into the UFO, the screen turns a solid blue. I can't explain it, but it's not uncommon for high-level interference events like this to transpire while UFO hunting. Essentially, that was it for filming at this location.
I then set up a camera from the kitchen window in my apartment. It was facing the same direction toward the abandoned field, essentially. My former apartment building, as you can see, has since been demolished and is now a luxury condo. But you can see my vantage point. Could I catch UFOs on video from the comfort of my apartment? The answer is yes, and they were some of the best sightings. But let's look at some of the colorful daytime UFOs caught right from this window. This shape reminded me of a dinosaur head, maybe in the Triceratops family, I don't know. But you can see a little glowing crystal-like horn on its nose. The dark areas could be the eyes. I realize I'm projecting here, but it's helpful to reference because it's such an anomalous form. What I like about this sighting is we're seeing some good detail on design. There are dark blue lines evenly spaced apart against a buff-colored background. The random flashing we're seeing could be reflections as this object rotates clockwise in the bright sunlight. But I can't say for sure if they're reflections. Nonetheless, a beautiful, high-quality sighting here from the kitchen window. I saw an iridescent blue object crest above a rooftop and then it dropped below out of sight. I thought I imagined it. A few seconds later, this shiny creature is visible again and turning in the air. Its surface seems to be smooth until the sunlight begins to bounce off of it, and then the reflection appears highly textured. This cosmic hood ornament is likely rising out of the creek that connects into the East River. It really put on an impressive display as it moved over a dense residential urban landscape. I shelved this sighting at first because it wasn't close enough to get details, so I didn't post it. 2 years later, I looked at it again and realized that it could actually be an alien being floating or flying in the air. It's unsettling, no doubt, but I went frame by frame, analyzing the footage through the distortion of distance and debris in the air. You can make out details of a head and large wraparound eyes. This reminded me of the powerful images painted by the well-known artist and abductee David Huggins.
The balloon-type UFOs have been very controversial for obvious reasons. It can be a fine, almost indiscernible line between the balloon-type entity and human-made balloons. I'm guessing that it's a type of mimicry, considering how this aerial fauna also take on the shape and form of birds, planes, and even airborne debris.
Here is a good example of one of these Etherian entities taking the form of a bird shape. Notice how the sunlight can be seen through its opaque body.
This adaptive camouflage deployed in human environments is a successful strategy, considering the general consensus that aliens are piloting the spacecraft. Most people don't want to look ridiculous in mistaking errant balloons or a plastic bag for a complex life form, shape-shifting to stay hidden in plain sight. This mimicry depends on the casual observer not paying attention to detail, and that's most of us, myself included at times.
In this example, it was the summer of 2012. It's dusk at the abandoned field. I'm tracking a dark cluster oddly flying across the evening sky. It eventually moves behind a cloud. I stopped recording, unfortunately, but a minute later, a luminous, small white plane-shaped object emerged. I suspect the conspicuous dark cluster transformed into this object that from a distance could easily be dismissed as a plane. Looking carefully at this footage, shot with the Canon HV40 that records to DV tape, you can witness an evolution of shape occur. The filament or tether eventually pulls up into the balloon part that is now hollowed out. After snaking up into the sky, it starts to move horizontally in the appearance of a round silver sphere. This evolutionary process caught on video is rare and reveals a potential metamorphosis that could possibly be one of the types of UFOs many witness in the New York City sky.
You could extend a theory from a biological perspective in how the balloon has a similar function to swim bladders, which are part of aquatic sea life anatomy. For example, jellyfish have a special swim bladder allowing buoyancy. Is there a similar biological function at work, allowing these objects to move around in the sky or as lighter than air? But things get more interesting and beyond biological theory. In December of 2008, I caught on video a fleet of nearly 300 objects flying in a formation, moving across the sky like a school of fish. This type of sighting has been documented in the Bronx and in Philadelphia, and here it is over the heads of millions in Queens and Brooklyn. There it is. Holy cow. I've shown this video in many public presentations, and the reactions are profound, especially when there are fluid directional change. It's almost it knew where the camera frame was and it wanted to stay in the camera. Watch this. Like that leading edge is just unbelievable. There are hundreds. Very to slow down, you can get a better view of the organization. However, weeks later, I noticed something else in the footage of this sighting. The questions often come up as to how these objects travel. Is it linear from point A to point B? Or do they use dimensional openings? Closer look at the footage caught prior to lifting the camera and zooming into the fleet has revealed something astounding. Notice there is movement from a seagull on the right, but then on the left you can make out a white round object. There is documentation of UFOs blinking out and vanishing, but here is one that seems to emerge from the fabric of reality. And looking closer, a dark trail can be detected. It follows the trajectory of something beginning to materialize into a white sphere, as it then arcs into the visible spectrum and quickly accelerates. By 2009, I continued to catch on video UFOs in varying shape and size flying around the skies of New York City. Later in the year, I had planned to stay at a cottage in Mystic, Connecticut with my girlfriend at the time. We drove up in the evening. It was raining. It had rained till dawn. That morning was windy and bright. There were deer along the property's tree line. I stepped outside and could see the deer silhouetted back in the trees. I glanced up at the clearing sky and watched two white objects move behind a cloud. And next to that cloud was a bigger object sitting perfectly still. You should see this. The clouds are going by, and you can see the brightness of it.
Geoff and I had traveled up to Mystic, Connecticut, which is not some place that we normally went. It was sort of out of the ordinary. And I was fairly accustomed to, being with Geoff and seeing UFOs in and around Brooklyn, in and around New York City. And then here we were, like, kind of out of the city in a place that I had never really been before, and there it is again, the same phenomenon. There's a silver object kind of hovering in the sky. Geoff asked me to kind of keep my eye on it as he was filming. I wonder why you never see, like, big fleets.
Well, that's interesting, babe. I think, this is a precursor usually to a fleet. That's what I'm saying. It's like I need an assistant to look around. Look. Check it out.
Babe, I don't force you to do stuff. It moved out. I'll help you a little bit, but you know that I have to stay here all day.
It's gone.
It's not. It's right there.
Oh, I see it. You're right.
It's not moving. I just recently saw the footage again, and then at the time I remember being like, oh my God, here it is. It's, following us out of the city. I remember that also happening a couple times when we went hiking upstate. Again, like, oh, there it is again. There's another orb. The orbs following Geoff around was like kind of like a regular occurrence. And in some ways, like, I kind of just took it for granted. It's, this doesn't happen to me when I'm alone. Seems kind of unique to this person.
Sunday, June 14th.
There's a couple of conclusions that I might draw on them. They might be military, they might be some kind of entity that's between dimensions. They might be some form of communication. I'm kind of willing to accept any of those explanations more than I'm willing to accept, like, oh, that's just not there.
If you just go to the peak of that tree and go up. See how bright it is?
this is unusual, I had plenty of time to set up a tripod and camera. And while I was doing that, I remember thinking, wait a minute, am I being followed here, or is this area also a UFO hotspot? And they're more likely UFO hotspots because the waterways in and around the 5 boroughs are known to have a lot of UFO activity, including Long Island Sound, which is where we were near. It's easy to become agitated and paranoid when immersed in this topic. Through the years, UFOs continued to show up on camera at the same location at the eastern edge of the East River in one of the world's most densely populated cities.
I took a look at a lot of things over a period of time, and I thought, wow, that's fascinating, but maybe that's just a balloon or an artifact or this or that. And then in all admission, I have to say that I know Budget Moon, and I know my friend who runs that station, and I see him as a highly credible person. And I see him as having reason to put something up or to point towards something. It may not be what I agree with, but I also put myself in his shoes to say, well, he would be able to see that it's obviously a balloon if it is, so why is he posting it?
Doug Auld is a well-known musician and talented painter. We've had many Skywatch sessions on Hoboken rooftops. He's among a handful of serious Skywatchers investigating UFOs.
I think his interest, Budget Moon's interest, from what I've seen him do in general, is similar but of a slight different wavelength of focus. I'm not so much interested in what I assume to be mimicry. It may be going right in front of me and I may miss it. I may write it off or something like that. And I think a certain person has to focus on something like that. A certain person has to say, hey, wait a minute, I see this kind of crazy thing and I'm going to keep my eye on it. Whereas I'm probably guilty of, as Grant Cameron would say, looking for more nuts and bolts in the sky and looking for things that are like, that fit the science fiction movies that I grew up watching.
You often hear descriptions of objects appearing in the sky. What about something vanishing, such as an entire jet?
It was in Hoboken here, towards the end of the town near the PATH train. And I was out on the island that they built, and I brought my camera with me because I'm a Skywatcher. I've been a Skywatcher for quite a while, and I'm always bringing my camera with me, even if I'm just relaxing. And I decided to watch the planes go by and just watch the sky. And I remember seeing a jet plane, a passenger jet, coming towards me. So coming from, I would say that would be north to south, flying north to south. And I remember watching it. I remember seeing the cloud, and I remember knowing that it's going to go behind the cloud, because I was trying to take some shots of it, and actually was trying to film it or take a couple of snapshots. And as it entered the cloud, I said, well, don't take any shots now. It's going behind the cloud. Wait till it comes out. And it never came out. Never came out. I thought, maybe it's me. I looked around. I'm like, where did the plane go? The cloud wasn't enormous. It wasn't like it was some huge, long cloud that like my timing could have been off. It just never came out of the cloud. And it should, based on the amount of time and the speed that it was moving, you could assume that, maybe if I counted to 8 at the most, it would have come out and I would have seen it go down south, but it never came out. So I've never been able to figure that out to this day.
Another anomaly associated with the balloon-type UFOs is the emission of flashing light or sparking. either from within the cluster or at the tether. This object was recorded from my apartment window in Brooklyn. It's cold out, and so the winter air is mixing with the radiator heat that's rising out of the window, causing a blurriness. But look at this tether/filament. Is it conducting electricity gathered from the atmosphere? It certainly looks like it could be. Dr. Nikola Tesla showed the world electricity can be extracted from the air as you increase altitude using wire or no wires. Is it possible Dr. Tesla saw these types of UFOs when living in Manhattan? Here's another example very early on in the documentation, showing again sparking along the filament or tether of several balloon-type shapes that are bound together somehow. Looks like a group of yellow balloons until you take a close look at what would be the balloon strings. Once again, anomalous activity is detected within the filaments that also perfectly match the shade of the yellow balloon shapes. Watch now as the glowing part of the filament begins to rise and fall along a thinner support line. This is another piece of evidence suggesting potential bioelectricity at work inside these aeroforms. When I arrived to the abandoned field one afternoon, this ghostly object was hanging in the sky, ready to be filmed. This is another great study of the potentially bioelectric filament. This is rotating counterclockwise, and some of those permutations almost appear to be faces. This is a very unique sighting. I haven't seen anything else like it. Now this is where it gets more supernatural. A closer look of what appear to be balloons reveal how a dark red colored entity in the center moves around the balloon-like spheres while flashing intermittently. And watch here as it seems to perform a backflip. This is very unusual activity. When you analyze it closely, it looks to be alive and bioelectric. I'm wondering if these objects are native to the planet, yet relegated to unofficial denial, as is the case with many cryptids. Here's another example from the summer of 2013 of a much larger cluster, maybe the size of a school bus, and it's creating a substantial light show here. But notice how the individual spheres within seem to rhythmically expand and wither. There's so much internal movement, color, and nuance happening as it ascends into the atmosphere. The release of a single object from these atmospheric fauna is often documented. In this strange, dramatic move, something seems to snap, triggering the release as a green object is ejected and descends. Here's another example captured from my kitchen window in Brooklyn, March of 2015. The sky is dark with a low ceiling, but you can still make out the many colors on this object. It also ejects something that slowly descends. Then it vanishes into the low clouds. This is one of the largest balloon-type entities ever captured so far. I spotted this massive aeroform from the kitchen window one afternoon. Notice the long paddle-shaped tendrils hanging. You'll also notice some ranging color from pearl to crimson and even a pale blue on top. Strangely, the bottom edges appear to bend downward from weight. When I posted the video online, it caught the attention of a fellow Skywatcher in Los Angeles. He made a short video analysis and also following up with balloon manufacturers to find out if this massive shape could be a product someone could order.
Hi, this is Han Topal as well. I just wanted to share with you this incredible video that I saw captured by the Sky Budget Moon from New York on September 18th, 2016. This thing was incredible. It was captured on a Sunday. And just to let you know, he's like a magnet for some of the most incredible things out there. You gotta check out more of his videos. So what I did was I pulled a 10-second clip of this. I added some carnival noise in the background. I ended up sending it over to large balloon arch makers. I just wanted to find out how much it would cost to reproduce. So I made myself out to be some sort of oceanography promotion company. Told them I was going to have an event in April, and I showed them this clip. And I told them I would like to duplicate this object. Out of the 20 balloon arc companies, only a few responded. I think this project was too large for many of the companies, so they didn't even respond. One of the emails that I received back said that they would never work for a company that would be so environmentally irresponsible as to release a balloon structure like this. I guess what we're seeing here is something that's environmentally irresponsible. A couple of companies said that these were 36-inch 3-foot balloons. I got anywhere from 300 to 800 balloons in this cluster. So I ended up measuring one of the objects with my Photoshop program and found out that it was 20 pixels wide. If these are 3-foot balloons, then this thing is 42 feet long, 27 feet high, and about 27 feet wide. The overall height of this thing is about 48 feet tall. I got email quotes to reproduce this object for $18,000 and $20,000. So here's my question. Who in their right mind would put something like this together? This is one of the largest balloon structures pretty much anybody's ever seen. There are no known close-up pictures of this object anywhere.
The balloon UFO subject is a strange frontier of adaptive camouflage and at times creepy synchronicity in the zeitgeist. For example, if there are high-quality sightings of balloon UFOs in an area, there might be misdirection and distractive reference in news stories, movies, or advertising. There might be a news story of a man who tied 500 balloons to his lawn chair and floated around his neighborhood, that kind of thing. Is it possible these Etherian entities have chosen the common balloon form as adaptive camouflage? It would be consistent with what author John Keel wrote about in his book titled Operation Trojan Horse. He suggests how through the years, UFOs would often mimic the latest aerial technology to blend in to keep a plausibly deniable low profile. And I'm guessing balloons are no exception here.
Jason Figura is a former EMT and a Skywatcher in the East Village. He's documented the strange activity of the balloon-type UFOs and associated synchronicity. He's paying attention to the context in which the sighting occurs and explains the strange emotional and psychological connection he's experienced with this very close encounter.
Yeah, so I've had some strange encounters with balloons that would show up under heightened emotional stress. Let's put it that way. In the beginning, they were just annoyances, but then after a while, I started noticing that right after the emotional stress, they would just show up. And I was like, okay, are these just balloons that are synchronistically coming into my field and it's nothing to think about, you know? Or is it something bigger? So, because a lot of times the balloons, they kind of appeared like a poltergeist. So there was a heightened emotional state that I would be in. It could be through psychedelics, it could be through breathing, and it could also be through stress, or sometimes a really good moment. So like if you had like a moment of the week, let's say, right after that moment, I would go and do something else, forget about the moment, and then suddenly something would acknowledge me with a sort of balloon illuminating phenomena. And one day I had an experience right here in this parking lot where I was talking to someone on the phone, and it got into an emotional argument, and it had a lot to do with holding on to the past. So I had a family member that was holding on to the past more than I thought they should. And as I was talking to them, they weren't getting it. So I started to get in an emotional state and a little family discussion, you know. Once my energy felt like it was getting high, where I'm like, this person's not understanding me, I'm walking back and forth, literally like back and forth in this parking lot. This door, this gate to the parking lot wasn't there yet. So it was just an open space right there. And when I turned around, in the middle of the street, right where that gray car is, about a dozen balloons just started rising up from over the hood of the car. So I instantly knew that this is my phenomena. This is the thing that's been kind of following me for a few years now. So I come running outside, and now these trees were a little fuller back then, so the balloons just kind of hid behind the trees. As soon as I ran out there, I'm saying like 3 to 5 seconds tops, I look up and the balloons are gone. So like a cluster of like 10 balloons, maybe 12, just started rising up from the middle of the street. Now mind you, this street at that time was completely empty. And New York's finest. So this street was totally empty. And so right around the middle of both streets, is, both sides is when the balloons started rising up, but it kind of came from right over the hood of this car. And then I ran out from the middle of the parking lot over here to see the balloons going up. So I look up and they're not there anymore. So when I had first seen them, they went up and they were hiding behind the tree. But like I said, as soon as I ran here, I look up and they're gone, and they didn't go up fast enough for them to go up, to be gone that quickly. They were just going up very slowly and gently. So for me to walk within the 5 seconds that it took to go from there to here, it's impossible. So it almost looked like a hallucination. But it was bizarre because these hallucinations, you can capture them with video. I had a sighting out my window. This sighting happened because I was writing a message on my phone and it had to do with the subject. So as soon as I finished the whole message and I hit send, a flash of light instantly shines from far away from out my window. And then it starts to just sit in the sky. But as soon as I pick up my camera, hit record, from the nervousness of trying to get it all done quickly, it starts to move really fast. So it starts to shoot like a UFO. But it's like a tumbling balloon. But it's tumbling in a weird way because it's kind of going like that, but it's moving in a straight line, but it's tumbling. Even the tether is not on the bottom. It's like all over the place. It's just spinning all over. And as it's rolling across the sky, I even on the video, I said to the person I was messaging, I said, I was just telling you this and this showed up. So then I go and I look at a video from Budget Moon, and it was the exact same UFO, identical as the one that was posted in 2016. And it was just shooting across the sky. He got a much closer shot at it than I did. And it causes us to ask deeper questions about ourselves when we see other people having the same experiences, sometimes at the same time.
Here's an interesting quote by Mead Lane, author of The Flying Saucer and Its Solution. Quote, "The aeroforms are thought constructs, mind constructs. As such, they are in effect the vehicle of the actual entity who creates them. Just as our own terrestrial minds rule and become identified with our bodies, so does the entity of the etheric world make for himself a body or vehicle out of etheric substance. The body may be of any shape or size, any one of 100 mutants, such as the indefinite and changing shapes reported by observers of flying saucers throughout the world. The shapes may be a wheel, a globe, a cigar shape, a fireball, vapor, or gas. It may have any density, any rate of vibration desired. The impenetrable steel of landed discs, or we may call it etheric steel. The shapes and vehicles in the entity operation then form one being, just as a human being is a psychophysical mind-body unity. The body of this entity is a thought form, which can go anywhere, and penetrates our earth and sea as easily as our air. In November 2015, I had purchased the Canon HF-G30 video camera and was testing it out at Roosevelt Island. I looked over and saw an object moving across the tops of skyscrapers. It looked like a massive black tarp, randomly caught in the wind. Looking closely, however, it wasn't at the mercy of prevailing gales. It had a controlled flight while cycling through various forms, including what appear to be bat wings. And these sightings aren't entirely unusual for New York City. John Keel writes about this in his book, The Mothman Prophecies. Quote, "Another kind of man in black haunted Brooklyn, New York, in 1877. He had wings and performed aerial acrobatics over the heads of the crowds of sunbathers at Coney Island. A Mr. W.H. Smith first reported these strange flights in a letter to the New York Sun, September 1877. The creature was not a bird, but a winged humanoid form. This flying man became a local sensation, and according to the New York Times, September 12, 1880, quote, many reputable persons saw him as he was engaged in flying toward New Jersey. He maneuvered at an altitude of about 1,000 feet, sporting bat wings, and made swimming-like movements. Witnesses claimed to have seen his face clearly. He, quote, wore a cruel and determined expression. The entire figure was black, standing out sharply against the clear blue sky. While there isn't much of a face on this entity, it is, however, important to note its descent into the East River. Here again, visual evidence revealing an aquatic nature to these aeriforms. My strategy was to consistently post the best sightings online, so I wouldn't get harassed by the agencies. They could simply go to the channel and see the videos. But that didn't seem to work out very well. I suppose it could have been worse if I didn't post anything. Either way, despite uploading high-quality supernatural footage, helicopters continually came in very low and circled the building. Here, I'm tracking a glowing white object from my kitchen window. I've no idea this NYPD helicopter is in the area until it rises up from the church next door without a sound. It's some of the creepiest surveillance I've seen. Usually the helicopters continue to circle the building or hover right above the building. From the air, it's a sea of apartment buildings and windows down below. The windows would essentially be blacked out during the day, especially seen from the air. Yet when I zoom into them, you get to see right into their windows, and the occupants seem to be looking down at my building. I suspect this has been to intimidate and to indirectly get me to stop UFO hunting from the kitchen window. Through the years, many unmarked helicopters and the NYPD helicopters would routinely circle the building or hover. Since I was no longer filming UFOs at the vacant field, I would occasionally visit Roosevelt Island to catch UFOs flying around from that vantage point. On one cold afternoon, this person followed me into the gated park area on the island, and as you can see, the park is empty, and I detour off the wide paved walkway and step up on a stone wall and walk up this hill. He still follows, and so I turn the camera on him, and as you can see, he suddenly and awkwardly pretends to be looking at his phone. These stalkers seem to want you to know what they're doing. One evening, I was getting footage of the skyline, same location, Roosevelt Island, and I see a person walking up the hill, but I'm turned around, my back is to him. I hear his footsteps stop somewhere behind me. There's no one else around, plenty of room, hundreds of feet around me. I turn around to catch him pulling back quickly, as if he had held something up over my head. Then he turns around here and walks down the hill.
Unfortunately, interference and harassment began to infiltrate into my circle of friends and even my workplace.
There were some questionable characters that were really interested in what we were seeing, what was in the sky, and who we were and why we were looking at these things. Also at the same time, there's just as many people out of the blue that would spend their time daily, weekly, to tell us that these things were just balloons. They were weather balloons. These things were just normal. Even the movements, even, these things that would stop and hover and change shape and then disappear.
Mike Williams is a musician and worked at the secondhand store down the street from me. He witnessed plenty of UFO activity in the area. We both watched as mutual friends and co-workers began to act very strangely in response to this topic.
I won't name any specific names, but there were definitely people who would clone and copy what Geoff would say and how Geoff would think, and maybe they were just fascinated by what was going on and how this energy of UFOs and other things were flying around, and maybe they just wanted to be part of it. One time we were all standing out front, sky watching. There's not much activity in the sky. And out of nowhere, a woman walked by and threw herself violently at Budget Moon. And I watched her actually just bounce off of him. I looked at Budget Moon and I asked him, "Did you just feel that?" And he said, "Feel what?" And I pointed to the ground, and the woman was looking up at him, not in pain, but maybe in fear. And I walked over to ask her, "Do you need a hand? Can I help you up?" And she just popped up with the look of fear in her face and hobbled down the road. It was very strange because Budget Moon didn't even realize that this person had thrown their whole body weight into him. Of that whole situation, again, I can remember clearly looking up and seeing two dark black dots hovering.
So there was a time period where maybe people in his neighborhood, among a group of people that, mutual friends, there was sort of a case made against him that he was like paranoid and crazy, obsessed.
This paranormal topic tended to cause strong reactions from certain friends who would say I was maybe paranoid or even crazy despite having the video documentation. It was disheartening for a while, but I was at a point in my life where I thought it was more important to follow through and continue the documentation than to be concerned about what former friends and coworkers thought about me.
When it was closer friends of Geoff's, like longtime friends that, sort of had to confront this issue, confront the fact that their very good friend was very convinced of this phenomenon and had extensive documentation of this phenomenon, it really brings up a lot of questions that one might not want to face. Like, what is it? Is it actually extraterrestrials? Is it the military? Am I being spied on? It kind of throws into question your entire worldview. So not everyone is just prepared to, think about that in a casual way. And then if you're a close friend of Geoff, you have to kind of resolve that for yourself. Like, okay, I have this friend who has extensive footage of UFOs. Like, what do I think about that? And so I did think, there were many occasions where Geoff's long-term, closer friends, just couldn't seem to resolve that. If you haven't experienced it for yourself, it's a difficult thing to believe, because I think it forces this question of, okay, well, what is it? And I think for most people, in answer to that question, like, oh, well, Geoff is crazy, is an easier answer than confronting what it actually might be.
I eventually moved to New Jersey for a few years and found another location in a public park where UFOs were showing up on camera. However, the interference continued at this remote spot, such as small planes circling and random people standing nearby while pretending to look at their phones. I consider this part of New Jersey to be the New York City area because it's less than a mile from the Hudson River. Here are some UFOs captured from that time. Take a look.
Initially, I thought this was a plane coming in for a landing into one of the airports, Newark or Teterboro. Not so. It appears to be some type of unconventional flying aircraft. Is this one of the vehicles of the breakaway civilization living among us? This vehicle is out in the open near two major airports, making no attempt to conceal itself as it coasts down to the ground in a fiery glow. Similar to the UFOs caught near the East River, this lavender and green object moves across the sky over a man-made estuary park by the New Jersey Turnpike. Another high-quality sighting over the park. Mosquitoes and biting flies are bad. I remember this day. Notice certain areas appear to be electrically charged up, while the base structure is subdued like a biofield of plasma. In May of 2020, this very large, bright white object appeared floating in a clear blue sky above the New Jersey park. It's an amazing sighting, but the footage is very shaky. The bolt holding the tripod mount came loose right as I zoomed in, and so I ended up clutching the camera with my hands, trying to keep it pointed at this moving object. The wings seem to be permanently open, conveying an archetypal shape and color of universal peace.
We can speculate based on petroglyphs that ancient observers saw these same UFOs, except when they scanned the sky, they did so without modern-day impediments and projection. There might have been communication of foundational archetype imagery, and maybe a lot more that helped shape their civilization. Nearly all of these UFOs captured seem to be a type of aeriform, Etherian, or atmospheric fauna. Strangely, detailed information related to these types of UFOs is generally suppressed and subject to unusually heavy professional disinformation. I suspect this might be related to how it's possible for human consciousness to easily communicate with this realm. I'm Geoff Brady. Thanks for watching New York Skywatch, a decade of UFOs.